We are deeply concerned by the situation in South Kivu particularly, which remains very volatile, with credible reports that the M23 is moving rapidly towards the city of Bukavu. In addition, our colleagues in the peacekeeping mission say that there are reports of Rwandan Defense Forces cross-border movements in that direction.
Nous allons assurer, et nous le faisons déjà, les couloirs humanitaires sécurisés pour les déplacés dans leur milieu d'origine. D'ores et déjà, je vous informe que des milliers de déplacés qui étaient dans des camps ont commencé à regagner leur milieu naturel, d'autant plus que la route, les deux grandes routes, Rutshuru et celle qui passe par Sake, sont désormais sécurisées. La réouverture, bien entendu, des axes prioritaires d'approvisionnement de la ville et en vivre et en non-vivre. Nous sommes ici à Goma pour y rester comme Congolais et protéger la population contre les inciviques. Nous allons continuer la marche de libération jusqu'à Kinshasa.
We must decolonize our minds. You don't need Macron. You don't need any president to tell us in Africa how we can make our own peace. Well, the history of what we now know as the Democratic Republic of Congo is a history that is long and has several twists and turns. And it is important to contextualize that history so that we are able to understand and appreciate what is happening now. The Congo Free State, as we know it today, was established by King Leopold of the Belgians. That is not to say that there are no African populations with over 450 nationalities. And we will also remember that it's the same King Leopold of the Belgians who was the force behind the Berlin Conference in 1884 and 1885, during which the current boundaries that we know of African states were established. But during that same period that Leopold was establishing the Congo Free State, the Germans under Bismarck in 1880 had also established a presence in what is present-day Tanzania, but was then Tanganyika, and in what was then Rwanda-Urundi, which we now know separately as Rwanda and Burundi. When the Germans lost the war, what is normally described as the First World War, but I prefer to call the First European Tribal War, what then happened is that Rwanda and Burundi were made to be trust territories of Belgium. So the original sin in terms of the conflict that we see in DRC today was planted in those days, planted by King Leopold of the Belgians, reinforced in Berlin in 1884 and 1885. And there is a beautiful book that has been written by the Nigeria called Dekeye Adebajo in 2010, which is titled The Curse of Berlin, Africa After the Cold War.
Hii hatuna wakati ya kulia, wameua ndugu zetu, wameua mama zetu. Tumesema kulipisha kisasi, wametumikisha bunduki, tutatumikisha bunduki. Kama wametumikisha mipanga, hiyo Mungu ataturumia, tutawalipa kwa mipanga. Ni kusema a partir ya kesho, tuna wale ambao wameandikiwa ni wengi. Haiko kujitapo, uliona echantio iko humu ndani. Hakuna malipana hata sanfra. Watu wopeke walijialika. Hakuna mwenye balialika humu. Ni kusema hatutasema yote ambayo tunajua hapa.
The problem of security in Congo started at independence when Prime Minister Lumumba was killed. And then you had got agents of foreign interests taking over power in the form of Mobutu. Congo has never settled properly, and the immediate problem now is that actually for a long time, Congo has been either supporting or harboring the enemies of other countries. The Mobutu used to support Savimbi of Angola, used to support Holden Roberto of Angola. Used to support Holden Roberto of Angola. We have got ADF in Congo, we have got other groups from Uganda, then you have groups from Rwanda, the Interahamwe. So that's really the origin of the problem. The Congo either supporting or simply harboring these enemies of other countries, of the neighboring countries. But now we have got a regional forum, the East African Forum, chaired by His Excellency Kenyatta. And we think now this problem can be solved because we talked frankly in Nairobi. Yes, the external players may make their own mistakes, but the original problem started with the Congo.
People that are fighting as M23 are of Tutsi stock, but they are Congolese. They come from around Kivu. The fact that a boundary was drawn by the colonialists and put them in a country that is now known as DRC, at one time was known as Zaire or Congo-Kinshasa, does not make them Rwandese. So the M23 was formed deliberately because the people who are then christened as the Banyamulenge thought that they were being discriminated against. They thought that the Congolese administration in Kinshasa was telling them to go to Rwanda, which is not their country. And this is something that has been debated over time. In 1996, when the country was still known as Zaire, the former president of Tanzania, the late Julius Kambarage Nyerere, in 1996, when delivering a speech in New York under the Peace Africa, the Peace Academy, said that we must be very clear that the Banyamulenge are not Rwandese. The Banyamulenge or the Tutsi who are to be found or who are found in Kivu are Congolese.
People running away from their own problems and blaming others, which this case seems to be. So,
using the word genocide is not by accident, probably, no?
Well, I wouldn't come to that and just leave behind defining the problem, what actually is taking place. Eastern Congo problems should be understood even by the person who leads that country. He does seem to have a selective memory of what to call what is happening there, because in Rwanda we have 100,000 refugees, 100,000, and they keep coming. And most of them have been there for over 20 years, and they are associated with this problem. And these people, they've lost their property, their land, their own relatives and friends have been killed in Eastern Congo because of who they are. You might want to know that the mirror image of what happened in Rwanda in '94 has actually evolved over years in Eastern Congo. The 100,000 people I'm talking about, and actually there are 4 times the same number in Uganda and I think others have gone to other places. They've been removed from their place, their property, and their lives have been destroyed because they are called Tutsis. So the Tutsis of Congo are supposed to be treated like the Tutsis of Rwanda in '94. And in fact, you see it when you look at the alliances that have even been formed, both on the ground in Eastern Congo and bringing in Burundi, and the pronouncements made by the same person making accusations publicly on the media platforms with the hate speech and the support for FDLR that killed the same Rwandans in Rwanda. So the way they come together under this leadership in DRC, I mean, to ignore that and you want to call it something else, somewhere else by somebody, I think you have to be missing something in your mind.
The argument, for example, that comes from the Kinshasa administration that they cannot have a face-to-face meeting with M23 is without merit, because it is the M23 who are on the ground, and they are an organized force with a clear chain of command. Even if it is true that the Rwanda government has given them logistical support, that does not take away the fact that they are organized and that they say they are Congolese. And we will remember that numerous attempts have been made to stabilize DRC. Numerous attempts when it was still called Zaire, numerous attempts when it changed its name to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and there have been peace initiatives, the most prominent of which has been the peace initiative by President João Lourenço of Angola, which appears to have faltered. There was also the Nairobi Peace Initiative, and we will remember that at one time all the East African countries did sanction an African force to go and help the Congolese administration, and they expelled the East African force and invited SADC. It must be remembered that DRC is a member of 2 regional organizations, perhaps even 3. But the most prominent are that they are members of the East African community and members of SADC. And as we speak now in the year 2025, it is the SADC forces that are prominent in that area. Internationally, we also have the UN, MONUSCO, which has been there for a very long time. And this is not the first time that M23 have actually invaded Goma and occupied Goma. There was a time when they did. But the things have escalated in a manner that was unprecedented, with the consequence that the Kinshasa administration severed diplomatic ties and asked that the Rwandese ambassador winds up their diplomatic activities within 48 hours. It is in that context that the Kenyan President William Ruto, who is the current chair of the East African community, then said, let us have an urgent meeting in order to resolve the problem.
Thank you, Chairman of our community. I want to associate myself with what has been said, especially what our sister President Samia Suluhu has just mentioned. But before that, let me raise a couple of questions maybe to guide us. I don't know if that is possible. One, is there anybody among us who did not see this coming? I for one, I saw it coming to be where we are now. I saw it coming because I did not see who was taking charge of the process who was listening, who was trying to provide any kind of guidance as to what we should be doing from one thing or one day to another. And by this I want to also ask, as the East African community, what did we want from the beginning? Or what did we do about that? What are we doing now? And what do we want to do for where we want to go? Because exactly like President Sami has mentioned, if it is talking about problems and defining them, and I think we have been very eloquent. We have talked about all kinds of things. But when do we match what we are saying and what we are doing so that we get to what we want? When do we come to that? I haven't seen it. President, I asked last time in our meeting, the last summit, where is East African community, or does it exist? And exist for what? By the way, even now the person or the country we are talking about is not represented as we are discussing. And it is supposed to be, the country is supposed to be part of East Africa, but nowhere to be represented. So I'm not sure what bearing what we are discussing has on what happens in the process of finding a solution in this country. I'll move on. The conflict that was created from the time we had the East African community get involved in trying to help in Congo, and later on when the East African force was trying its best and we are seeing progress, Tshisekedi decided they are not doing what he wanted and went to SADC. SADC agreed they would come and do what he wanted and sent everybody else packing. And that we complied and kept quiet. What really did we expect to come out of this? Now, worse still, I think even in East Africa itself, ourselves, maybe we have different understanding of what the problem is, and we have never come together to agree or even disagree and find a way to come together finally to do what we ought to do to deal with.
There was an internal problem in Rwanda, which started in 1959, started by the Belgians, who massacred Tutsis and sided with some local traitors called the Hutu extremists. Now that generated a Tutsi diaspora from 1959, which stayed out of Rwanda until 1990 when they made a comeback. And in the fight, the foreigners decided to back the Hutu extremists to kill 1 million people. You must have heard of that, the genocide. Then the Tutsis now. Then, but this did not save the Hutu regime. The Hutu regime was defeated, and they fled with their supporters to Goma, to Eastern Congo, with their arms. And we begged Mobutu to disarm them. He refused, until the Tutsis in Eastern Congo, called Banyamulenge, took up arms and attacked these Hutus, who then. So that's the whole problem. For me, I don't want to say this one is to blame. We know the problem. The problem started with, as I told you, Congo being either supporting or harboring, and then the outsiders can also make their own mistakes, but the original problem is the other one. Because if it was not there, it would not be possible for Rwanda, for instance, to be involved in Congo 1990. No, 1994.
But if the parties decide or accept to be manipulated, because, and by the way, that's exactly what happened, and I think in Congo, there are experts for doing that. They would go to one party and promise them something, and then they would decide to keep quiet about what is obviously going to result into problems like we are seeing now. He didn't want East African community because they were not doing things the way he wanted, even if it was not right. He got rid of them and he decided to bring in SADC. SADC was, without any question, coming to assist Tshisekedi to fight alongside FDLR, these murderers of our people here in this country, to fight against mercenaries, and to have Burundi on ethnic political basis decide to support Tshisekedi in whatever endeavor, including exactly doing what those murderers did to our people and what they are doing in Eastern Congo. They have displaced people, they have killed people, they have persecuted them on a daily basis for who they are. We have refugees here who have been here for the last 20 plus years, just dislocated from Congo and sent to Rwanda because they say these are ethnic Tutsis and therefore they belong to Rwanda, they don't belong there. And everybody is around. I don't know how many entities we have in Congo, honestly. We have MONUSC, we have SAMI DRC, we have mercenaries, we have Burundi, we have FDLR that has joined them, and everybody is there watching this thing, and we pretend it's like we don't understand what has been going on for all these years. And then when things like this of last week erupted, we behave like we are surprised or we are concerned about humanitarian crisis, about this and that. Isn't persecuting and killing people and displacing them part of that humanitarian concern? So as East Africans, we sit here and then do what about it? For the last 2 days, on Monday and today this morning, I spoke with the President of South Africa, who sought me out to speak with me on this matter because of their involvement in Eastern Congo, and he's also there pretending to be playing a peacemaker role, and he has a force that has been fighting alongside FDLR and has been fighting the M23 on the instructions of Tshisekedi, because these are people who are not supposed to be in Congo, that these are from Rwanda, or the M23 are not Rwandans, please.
It is important to point out that it is unwise for African leaders to use colonially created and inherited boundaries as a basis for shutting out populations. One of the reasons why in 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and in 1964 in Cairo, Egypt, it was agreed to retain the boundaries was not because we wanted to use them as paddocks to discriminate, but because it was thought that trying to recreate them would cause chaos. It was also understood that they'll only be useful for purposes of administration. It cannot be right that we are talking about African unity, we are talking about free movement of persons, and then we begin to say that some are Congolese, some are Rwandese, some are Burundians. I hope and pray that those who for the time being are in positions of leadership in the DRC will recognize and see the big picture and negotiate. The stance that they have taken, that they are not going to negotiate with M23, is, in my view, self-defeating. You know, I understand President Ruto is the current chair of the East African Community Summit, having taken over from President Salva Mayardit Kir of South Sudan. So in that context, I understand that he is reacting properly and saying, these are member states, let's have an urgent meeting. But it beggars belief that you are calling the president of a former colonizer and a neo-colonizer to tell you how to run African affairs. But all these are out of what I call colonial hangover. African politicians still hold the view that they must be second-guessed and supported by presidents of former colonizers. We must decolonize our minds. You don't need Macron